Ever since I was a kid, I've been a fan of this sharp sans serif font that I often saw in ticket stubs, newspaper ads, and magazine covers from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was so cool and unique, with sharp points on the A and V and skinny crossbars on Z and E. Even when I became a professional graphic designer and began to recognize fonts, I still never ID'd this quirky old one. It wasn't Futura, it wasn't quite Gill Sans, and it wasn't Cable. I kept images of the mystery font in my folders of font ideas, but I had nowhere near enough samples to recreate a full alphabet. Then a few years ago, I was over at my friend Brian's house. He brought out a bunch of old LA Times newspapers he'd kept from the 1969 moon landing, which was then celebrating its 50th anniversary. As a big fan of the space program, Brian had saved a bunch of Times front pages and had even driven to Florida with his girlfriend to watch the Apollo 11 rocket launch at Cape Canaveral. As a font nerd, the first thing I saw in the papers was this gorgeous headline font, with its swooping Art Deco curves and sharp angles on the corners and ends. And then when I looked closer, I realized the subhead was in my mystery font. Brian graciously let me borrow his precious papers, and I carefully unfolded and scanned them to collect as many letters as I could find of the subhead font, as well as the tall headlines and tiny photo captions. Eventually I learned that the mystery font was named Metro, and it was originally designed in 1929, which also meant that, alas, digital fonts indeed already existed. But what didn't exist yet was a version with all the delightful grunginess and imperfection of ink on old newsprint. Even after scanning Brian's papers, I was still missing a lot of letters, particularly J's, Q's, X's, and Z's, and most of the punctuation and symbols I would need to complete the fonts. So I abandoned the project for a while, though the partially finished fonts ended up working perfectly in my designs for a Jazz Age-themed nightclub in downtown LA. This year I decided to dig in and finally complete the fonts. So I started searching the web for images of LA Times newspapers when I discovered this book. I was delighted to find that J's, Q's, X's, and Z's abounded within, as juries were quizzed, Nazis blitzkrieged, and Nixoned. I also found nifty alternate versions of letters A and G and some other numbers. With all of this source material, I was able to create 5 weights, each with 3 versions of every letter and 2 versions of every number, which automatically cycle while you type. Hopefully my finished Newshound fonts forever capture and preserve that wonderful look, feel, and perhaps even the smell of ink on old newsprint.